Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
John Barklow, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a little over a year, almost a year and a half since you've been on.
Has it been that long, Bo? Wow.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I think we've talked in between there, but I didn't realize it'd been that long. Congrats, man, because your podcast and platforms are definitely expanding.
yeah. No, thank you. And it's funny because at one point I think you were on a couple times a year there, and I've learned that there was somebody else I had on recently. It was the same thing. It felt like it was just yesterday, but as I've been just recording, and this will be episode 290, so I've been doing
Wow.
quite a few over the last 5 years. But you were one of my first guests that came on, and yeah, we've definitely stayed in touch over this period of time, and got to see what you've been doing with Knowledge from Storms, and going from not wanting to put out any content. And I know that you still don't love that aspect, but you want to help people, and
Yeah,
I think that's been pretty cool to see.
I like to say I'm a somewhat of a reluctant participant, but the feedback's been awesome. So that's what kind of keeps feeding me to keep doing it. But yeah, damn, 290 episodes. That's amazing, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't believe that I'm still going this long, and that anybody still wants to listen in. But it's been really fun. I get to talk to so many awesome people throughout this time frame, and learn and grow as a hunter myself, just from talking to people that are much better than myself. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. Yeah, congrats.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it was exciting that wasn't really exactly planned this way, but I had noticed that the time of recording this, that your outdoor class course just came out, and you and I are both doing that, which I haven't talked a whole lot about it on this platform, but it was exciting. I got to go through your course a little bit early over the weekend there, and it's extremely helpful for anybody that's looking at the whole trip planning and preparation and everything that you've been doing through Knowledge from Storm. So tell me a little bit about how that process has been going.
Yeah, it's actually been a really great positive process. I just said I was kind of reluctant to do this, but Outdoor Class, they've assembled such a professional team to, help people like you and I make these courses and products like as high end and professional as possible. Um, yeah, I've kind of been working with them almost a year now, believe it or not. And we recorded the course in October, as I was telling you, but just the work it takes to kind of get ready for that. I already had a lot of things similar to you written down, and ideas and things we talked about, and I'd had an idea that I maybe wanted to do some courses at one point in time, but you know, at the end of the day, you have to realize what you know and what you don't know. And so, yeah, it took me 30 years to get the knowledge I have, but I don't have another 30 years to figure out how to film it and edit it and, get it live. And so it was just such a great opportunity. Randy Newberg approached me about it. And so we finally recorded in October, and then just the last couple months, it's been, back and forth on edits and trying to kind of put it together. And so, yeah, so Backcountry Mission Planning just launched today, which is the 27th of February. So yeah, I'm excited. And I've got a couple more that I'm not supposed to do, but I'm working on already. As you know, it's
Yeah.
a bit interesting, to write a script and to write a course like that from an outline. So just been working on that, kind of getting the next two, and that my intent is that the next two build on this first one, which is really foundational to anything, kind of backcountry related, and just trying to draw on, 30 some years of experience and making mistakes and seeing other people make mistakes and learning from that, and just trying to lessen the steepness of the learning curve for folks.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredible, And as we've talked about before, and I apologize, I haven't given John a good introduction here, but for anybody that's listened to the podcast for a while, and John's been on here quite a few times and has a very extensive background in this planning and survival, and not like the total bushcraft side of things, but realistic planning to survive out in the mountains and make sure you have your planning there. And also being, I believe your title is still the big game product manager at Sitka Gear. But there's, you have a very extensive knowledge base through years of training and just real world experience out there in the field. So it's really cool to be able to see that, where, you get the people from outdoor class that are able to, that know the video, they know the editing side, they can help steer you in the right direction as far as how to articulate that so people can, best, I guess, consume that information. So it's super helpful that it's all in one place too, all in one platform.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like, as you mentioned, been on your podcast a lot, and just as an example, we talked about, maybe it was the last time we talked, I don't remember, but we talked about altitude, and then you went to Colorado, and had some experiences with altitude there. But, you have all this information and it's a little bit disorganized across all these different platforms. And so it's been great to kind of focus it and bring it together and put it in one class that's, it's 16 chapters long. So, it's pretty extensive. I think it kind of goes from A to Z. In my mind, just about anything you could want to know, or at least touches on, to kind of get prepared to find as much success as you can.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like that it's in bite-sized pieces, and those videos that could be anywhere from 4 minutes to 12 minutes long that you can kind of consume at any time from your phone and go through it at your own pace. And because I always had the idea of doing my own course and kind of, I have a little more background than you do on the editing side and doing that portion, but it's a big lift. And then also it's like, okay, if I put this out on my own, people have to buy this, and it's just this particular thing where someone can spend the $100 a year and have all of this stuff from yourself, Remy and Randy and Corey and all of these other people, Hank Shaw and everyone else that's in. There's a giant list of people that I know they keep adding to, and it's all in there, and that you can kind of consume that at your own level. And it's all, not sure the right term, but it's basically all in one place and organized in a way that you can consume it and make actions based off of those things, versus kind of being scattered around like you were talking about with the amount of podcasts and stuff that you've done over the years.
Yeah, and you can go back and, rewatch a chapter as many times as you want, or take the whole course. And like you said, this platform of outdoor classes, kind of maybe the best analogy I've heard is it's essentially like master class, where you could go take a college course from, say, the world's best professor in physics at Harvard as an example. But it's basically for all things outdoors. It's pretty broad in its scope. But yeah, that one yearly membership gets you access to every bit of content on there, not just my course, not just your course when you come out with it, but everybody's course on there you have access to. So I don't know of any other place for anybody, hunting, fishing, outdoor related, that platform exists. It's in some regard, it's a little bit amazing it's taken this long, but when you actually see the back end and the work and the time and the investment it takes to do it, and that outdoor classes put into it, you're like, okay, maybe I understand a little more why nobody else has done it yet. But they're definitely doing it the right way, like in my opinion. Very professionally done.
Yeah, no, it was so cool when it was back when this was over a year ago, I guess, when I first got the call. My phone, I got a text message and it was like, "Hey, Beau, this is Randy Newberg. You mind giving me a call?" And I was like, and I had never met Randy before, but I've known him, okay. And I was like, holy cow, what's this about? And then I found out what he was looking for there, and I was like, this is yeah, same thing. I'm like, I can't believe it's taken this long for someone to do that. But yeah, now seeing the workload that goes into it from outdoor classes perspective, and all of ours as the creators there, it takes a lot to be able to curate that information and be able to put it out there. But no, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, you've got to really want to teach and be kind of committed to it to want to sign up as an instructor. Um, you and I were just talking a little bit off air, but you have this knowledge and it takes years to acquire the knowledge. Um, so you've thought about it, but how do you, and to your point, like get it to market? How do you get it so where it's curated in such a way that it's consumable? And that's what they've really helped me with. Um, but when you think about from an instructor standpoint, the time and besides what it took you to get the knowledge, the time it takes you to get the course, to market, it's a lot, and it really does take a commitment. And some people I think are really good at conveying that message, and I'm sure when you do yours, it'll be awesome. Um, but it's not for everybody to be able to sit there in a studio and knock out 16 chapters, and like we were talking, all the B-roll that goes with it and the editing. And
Yeah.
I thought I had a pretty good idea. I've not done anything to this extent, but I thought I had a pretty good idea of what it was going to take. And I mean, it was probably conservative. It was probably 3x, maybe 4x the amount of time that I thought. And although I enjoyed it, and I told you I'm working on a few others, but it's just a lot of time, and it's a lot of attention to detail and commitment. But ultimately, I think they help somebody like myself put out a product. I mean, I am incredibly proud of it. Since I left the military in the kind of mid 2014, I'd had this idea, I wanted to do something like this. And back then I literally had no idea what that took. But then like you said, the more you think about it, it's like, geez, like I don't even know the people it would take that, for me to bring in to help me get this done. And then it would still be this one-off in this whole world of other platforms. And so that's the cool thing what Outdoor Class is doing. And I don't know if you've seen, I won't give it away, but just the people that they're trying to get to create courses, or signing on to create courses, and the diversity of not only the people but the information they're put out. Like, this is going to be like a one-stop shop for anybody either experienced or somebody brand new that wants to get into any of these outdoor pursuits. Because you and I both know that hunting and fishing, I guess I'll throw in there, they're not the easiest things to learn or to get started doing. And if you don't have a dad or granddad that was kind of your mentor and kind of helped you, and just slowly over time as a kid, kind of got, heard some lessons learned and went out and tried some of your own, like it's kind of intimidating. And I don't know where to go. I don't know how to do this. Like, where do I learn, animal behavior, or whatever the case may be. And so that's what's so cool about this is almost like a modern day mentor for hunters and outdoorsmen that haven't had that. And I wished I'd have had this, because I was the self-taught archery hunter and failed at all of that for decades, really. And so it's like, it's so cool that we're finally to a point in our evolution as an industry and just outdoors people that we have this platform. So
Yeah. And it is cool too. Like the information that's out there now, I don't want to say it doesn't make anything like easy, but what it does is it gives you the tools to be able to put in the work in the right direction and help reduce that learning curve. You know what like, it's not, you can't go without the experience. Like, the experience is what is the best teacher to be able to have you that, but being able to, maybe step over a few mistakes without, making them on your own helps with, everyone's got limited time even more so than ever. It seems like everybody's extremely busy, and families and just time is very valuable. So I think it's super helpful to be able to have that. And then in the case of your courses, and in a lot of cases being, potentially life-saving by utilizing some of those things and paying attention to it. And I've learned a lot from you before this course, but it was really nice to be able to see that all in one place and be able to take it there. So, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of hit on that up front.
Yeah, I think that courses like this and this outdoor class platform, you still have to climb the hill, but it helps you start maybe a little bit farther up the hill than right in the valley. You still have to go get the experience. I think that when you hear information and just different ways people do it, and you get different perspectives, something's going to stick. Some things that, that I think any of us may talk about in our courses, some people might not even know, is something you need to consider. Altitude again is kind of one of those where people are like, because I've talked to so many people, not you and I podcasted about it, but talked to so many people, and they're like, they just didn't understand. I mean, this last summer, two guys came up to me and we were talking, and they're like, hey, we're going to hunt mule deer at 13,000 feet in Colorado. And I guess they already had the tags by that point. It was maybe late June. And I was like, oh, cool, and they started asking me all these questions. And I realized that like they had no idea, like they knew how to hunt, but that environment was so completely foreign to them that they didn't understand altitude, or they didn't understand how to acclimatize, or they didn't have a plan of action if and when, that late afternoon thunderstorm rolls over and there's lightning. And so, spent a good amount of time talking to those guys, but I'm like, man, like, I think there's something, and these guys are probably mid-30s. I'm like, yeah, I think there's something more we need to talk about to help people. So
Yeah, no, and I think that's, from my perspective, it's so important, and it's never the sexiest thing to talk about. It's always more fun, I guess, to talk about, tactics for calling elk and doing all these things. But like that aspect of it is so important. And me coming from a background in safety and health, from what I did in my previous career, and like planning and doing all these things, like I understand the importance of all of that stuff, and being able to see it where it just can't be overlooked, even though that, again, isn't the sexiest thing to work on, or putting together these plans and the route planning and everything that comes involved with it. But it can definitely make your experience, as you and I have talked about many times in the past, on clothing and layering and all of that stuff. It's doing these things will help make your experience that much better, and hopefully make it where you don't even notice that you could have had any problems, because you mitigated those risks ahead of time. So
yeah, I don't think people realize, who haven't done it, like how much planning and training and effort goes into some of these trips. And when you do them enough, it kind of becomes second nature. But the reality is that planning is still there. And so that kind of builds the foundation of any trip, no matter what you're doing, right? It could be a canoe trip, it could be a hunting trip, it could be a backpacking trip. And so I like this course specifically. Backcountry Mission Planning really focuses on what I just generally call the care and feeding of the hunter. So, everything from mindset and training to, your lessons learned after the fact. And it's not something that's often talked about. And to your point, it's not maybe what people consider the sexiest. Like, probably not going to be the cover of a hunting magazine where it says, Backcountry Mission Planning. Like, I'd love it, right? But it's going to be the outcome of that, which is the animal. But we spend so much time and effort and money and focus on building the perfect rifle round, or shooting our bows, and going to these different events throughout the summer. Obviously, e-scouting is a huge thing, and there's some cool courses coming on e-scouting. But I was kind of like, okay, well, what else are you doing to prepare for the hunt? And what are you doing with that e-scouting? And what I realized is, people, and we've all done this, right? I can go on Google Map and I can take the course and I can find the unit and I can drop all these pins. And then you ask the person, you're like, well, what altitude are you hunting at? And they're like, well, I didn't know that was important. Well, how long are you gonna, plan it to get to altitude? Or what's your water source? Or how far is it from the trailhead to your first glassing knob? And they've dropped all these pins, but they don't necessarily know, or they say, well, it's only 5 kilometers. And I'm like, 5 kilometers, but how much elevation gain or loss? Like, how many ridges are you going over? And that's the reality, right? So it's like that next level thing that you start to get into. And then it's like, well, what's your clothing system? And then what's your training plan to kind of get prepared for this? And, none of us want to spend the money on the tag and then spend the money on the gas, time away from home, vacation days burned. And this has happened a lot. And I know you've heard this as well. And then people get to the trailhead or they get into the area and they haven't planned properly for whatever reason. And they spend 1, 2, or 3 days and then they blow up and then the trip's over and they're back home. And so if nobody kind of comes in and says, okay, well, let's look at this and here's why this happened and here's how to make that trip next year, the year after, like that much better to help you ultimately find success. Like, hunters are just going to quit and go do something else, right? Play tennis or something.
Yeah. Well, and know what's funny about like that trip that you were talking about with me and Colorado and the altitude, and it was similar to those hunters that you were talking about, going 12,000 feet and hunting mule deer. And I felt like I had a decent plan going into it. You and I had talked about it ahead of time.
You did, yeah.
And there was some other circumstances which I've talked about on here before where I was sick with both the sinus infection and had mono going into it. Didn't know that at the time, and that didn't help with the altitude. But honestly, though, there was some other things that I found some big gaps in my plan. Was like, okay, so I had this hunt plan with 5 different areas and then had specific locations within there, how to access it, the routes, all those things. But what I didn't have was anything at lower elevation. Everything was up there, and that could even be, even if it wasn't, me dealing with altitude. But for me, it was like the doctor's like, you can't go above, I can't remember, it was 8,500 feet or whatever, again for the rest of this trip. Well, I didn't have any places marked. I had to go to ground zero. I'm sitting in a hotel trying to e-scout and wasting all this time because I didn't have other plans in place to be able to do that. And or maybe it's weather that, that could push you off the mountain and having these places. And I even look at it from I've taken this even in my whitetail hunting planning of like we had this past year with a very warm rut where the deer might not be in the tops of the mountains as much or running the higher in the hills. They're going to be down in the valleys and the cooler and the hemlocks down by the streams. And if you don't have these multiple things, I guess places marked from e-scouting and your planning and having this all in your hunt plan to be able to make a switch or pivot, then you can be kind of shit out of luck and that portion and waste a lot of that time. And it's something that I take very seriously now. Well, even more so with when I'm doing those reports afterwards, which I think I know you talk about in the course, and is being able to reflect on it and putting a report together of everything that you learned. And it's helpful for me. Like I'll do it right in my phone in my notes while I'm out in the field. Anything that comes up that's like either if it's gear related or me that I'm struggling with, I put it in there as like, okay, I need to work on this. It needs improved upon.
Yeah. I actually give you all the credit in the world for the Colorado trip because one, you had learned, right, about altitude and all those kind of things. But then when it happened, you were aware enough, you were educated enough to understand what was going on. And then you had the discipline to get the heck off the mountain, right? And then, like you said, then you had to figure some other things out. So, those things happen. Another thing that I talk about is weather considerations. So you talk about you didn't have any place down low, but depending on where you're going, say you're going to hunt at 8,500 feet or you're going to hunt at 12,000 feet, those are different environments. And oftentimes the weather can be completely different. And so, we're in our garage. It's July. We're planning for our trips. We're getting all psyched. We, bought any new gear, tested it, whatever we needed, and we're packing. And we just can't fathom that in, say, mid or late August, that it could snow. If you're at any kind of altitude, or it could be below freezing. And so if you're not prepared, a lot of times that's what gets people into trouble. Our first week of rifle season here in Montana almost inevitably seems like it's got some snow. And oftentimes the snow is at altitude. So, I live around 5,000 feet. It could be raining here. Hell, it could still be sunny, but it could be snowing a foot or 2 or 3 in the mountains that first week of rifle. And so people will go in a couple days early before the storm hits. Maybe they have a weather forecast, maybe they don't, maybe they haven't thought through it. And then they kind of have an unforced error and make themselves, at the worst, they make themselves a casualty, right, or a victim. And, kind of the lesser of those is they just ruin their trip and they get pushed out, right? And, if it's a blizzard up there, you're probably not going to run into a deer or elk anyways. So, and just having that knowledge to be able to be adaptable and change. And it's just not something that, if you haven't kind of grown up with it, so to speak, that you're just not as aware of as maybe you need to be, especially when you start moving from state to state and environment to environment. And some recent market data that we got is kind of fascinating in the sense that, and really I think the years of COVID kind of brought this on, but there's more than 50% of hunters are hunting four or more states a year. And so, sure, like in your neck of the woods, you could be hitting just the 4 states around you and hunt turkey. I mean, that's probably part of it. Mm-hmm. But I mean, look, the name of your podcast, right? Eats Meets West. More and more people are going from east to west. And mind you, people are going from west to east, right? But when you come out west, it's a little bit more desolate. The terrain's completely different. There's a lot more things to consider. Do you have to cross a river? When would you do that? How do you do that? What's the temperature going to be like? Altitude all of a sudden becomes a factor. Finding water, all these things that really make or break your hunt before you ever get to the point where you're implementing your hunting skills, right? Your calling, your shooting prowess, your, whatever it may be, tracking, you still got to go out there and live and, thrive. I don't like to use the word survive, but, go out there and live and thrive and be able to care and feed and care for yourself, to spend enough time out there to give yourself those opportunities, right? And then when you find the elk or the deer or whatever, now you can put into play all the cool things that you practiced and we all want to talk about and are fun to do. But if you can't go spend a week out there, the chances of you ever finding success are so slim that, you probably need to refocus on some skills, some skill development anyways.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can even think of an example of last year. I was hunting in Montana in May during spring bear, and I was with my buddy Gary, who you've met since then, and Trevor, who works for Sitka, and we were trying to find a place to glass from this one point, and Trevor had found a good glassing point on the map, but it was like, all right, how do we access this? And, in between all of us having been hunting for a while, we were able to pick a route that we had to navigate through some cliffs and being able to look at the topography and the way everything, laid to be able to safely navigate that and get to that location, and then how to do it in the dark and going back and backtracking and have all this stuff. Well, anyways, if we wouldn't have been able to get to that point, we would never saw that bear that I ended up killing the next day. But that's all, those are little skills that you don't think of when you're looking at a map and you just drop. Oh, I remember the first time I went out west, I was dropping points all over. I'll glass from here, here. And then I get there and I had no idea how to get to those places. And some of them weren't even realistic. And it's like, by understanding that, and then even later in that hunt, I killed my bear and it was on the way in, we were hiking in a t-shirt basically. And then by the time that I was shooting, we were laying in our rain gear and it was sleeting. And so, shot it. And the next day when we went back in to try to find one for Gary, we got dumped on with over a foot of snow, and him and I are up there building the fire, kind of just sitting there talking with winds. It was just insane, with the weather change. And him and I were sitting there talking, and he's got extensive training on the background like you do. And he, we were talking about why we were joking of like, why would you never bring your rain gear for how light it is, and even in your puffy gear for like, even though it was 70 degrees. And if you would have looked at the long-term forecast, it didn't show that, but we were in there long enough. There's two things that I think helped was having Garmin InReach that has weather in it, and I check that to be able to get weather alerts. Still, it's not, it's not going to tell you exactly depending on your elevation what you're getting, but it gets you, somewhat close. But being able to plan for that. And then I went against my own rule when I was out there, and not my own rule, but what I knew better. And when I was in Montana elk hunting, I was out there for 21 days, and I went back to the truck on day like 17 to get some more food and go back in. And it had been hot and dry this whole time. And I took my rain pants out and threw them in the truck. Didn't bring them in. What do you know? We get a day of like 37 degrees and mist the whole day. And I don't think I had gaiters either, which is so dumb. And I know better. And all of a sudden my pants get wet from the brush and all the stuff getting wet, and then it soaks into my socks, and then it soaks in my boots, and then you get blisters.
And then you get blistered.
Yeah. Yep. And it's like, and I was so mad at myself because I was like, I knew better than to do that. And I just, and it was like, Gary and I talked about this 3 months ago. Why would you not bring your rain pants on something like this? And it was just a lesson learned. And I was thinking, I thought of some you lessons, when I was doing that.
Some lessons I've had to relearn multiple times, right?
Yeah.
So just to kind of reinforce the pain a little bit. But you talk, that's such a perfect example of that bear hunt, and I had a bear hunt last year where it was like all 4 days were completely different weather-wise, and often in spring you get that, and often in fall, especially out west, right? But I mean anywhere, but out west maybe because of the isolation it's a little more important. But I talk about a little bit in the course, but I mean I probably write a whole course just on quote survival. But when you think about clothing, and it's like whether, clothing is kind of your first line of defense against the elements. And when you realize it can be dynamic like that, and that weather forecasts, even when you get them, aren't super accurate, again, based on, elevations and things like that, and one side of the mountain vice the other side of the mountain, and all different kinds of considerations, that a lot of times when people get in these situations that are, quote, a survival situation, having taught SAR groups and talking to people and, seeing it myself, and I've never really been in an experience where I've, had to like hit SOS, but I've certainly been in situations where I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to, make it out of this completely unscathed. You realize that a lot of it's unforced errors by the person, right? Or by the group of people. And, if you don't realize that today could be sunny and tomorrow could be a foot of snow, and you don't bring that puffy jacket and rain gear because, we all get in this mindset of wanting to cut ounces and things like that. But it's like, man, but don't do it where those ounces could compromise your safety or the hunt, especially if you're driving like across the country to go on a hunt and you've got all this investment. And, you can't control, lightning strikes and bears and things like that. But what you can control is, the gear you bring, how prepared you are, what your training was. And so that's where it's like, where you guys just took it, and let's just say that snowstorm became a setback, and it's going to be a cool thing to talk about, and you built the fire and you hung out, and it was just a great bonding experience, right? If you didn't have that equipment, if you didn't have that little bit of knowledge, that could have become a quote survival situation, right? Where somebody's getting hypothermic, and you guys have to try to make it out. Maybe you start, fighting for maybe not your life, but maybe some limbs or some toes or fingers, And I think when people look at the pros, and I think, Beau, if we want to admit this or not, we are kind of looked at in that vein now, right? And for our little, our disciplines, they don't realize that I go nowhere without a puffy jacket and rain gear. Now that rain gear and puffy jacket may change depending on the environment and where I'm doing it, but like I always have that stuff. And so things that other people may be fighting for their life on maybe just become a setback to you or I. You're trying to get back down with that bear. You guys get cliffed out. You're like, well, the best course of action is just to sit down and wait for daylight. You know that because you're experienced, but you also know that you're not going to unduly suffer. You know that you have enough stuff to at least ride out the night and not die, right? And so you're more inclined to make that good decision as opposed to potentially the bad decision and try to get down through the cliffs at night. Somebody falls, somebody slips, somebody tumbles, hits their head, breaks their ankle, and then all of a sudden these things start to cascade. And even though things like that happen, let's just say I slip and fall down the rocks and sprain my ankle and can't walk out. I have an inReach, right? So I've mitigated some risk. I communicate with my friends. My friends know where I'm at because I've given them a route plan, or my buddy that's with me is able to walk out. And I've got enough stuff that I can sit there in somewhat relative comfort for 24 hours until my buddies come in and help me get out of the mountains. And I'm not mashing the SOS button, go, man, if the helicopter doesn't fly and come get me, I'm going to die. Oftentimes when people get hurt, the weather's such that a lot of those air assets can't even come in and get you, right? And so you just start to learn some of this stuff, and then it's all kind of interconnected. And, that's what I hope people over time start to learn. They listen to these stories, they listen to our mistakes, and they're like, I remember that one time, that John said he did this or that, and he shouldn't have done that. And that's what helps. And that's what starts to lay that foundation to people learning what to do and what not to do, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, like you said, like out west is like, I guess, the pinnacle of where some of those bad things can happen. But the way I look at it too is like that stuff for a lot of the listeners here that are, even primarily deer hunters, the same things can be applied, and the same things can happen, just maybe not as an extreme a risk. But even like, for example, someone going into, say you're going to hunt somewhere and you have a tree stand, or maybe you're going in to set up in a saddle or whatever it is, making sure someone knows where you're at all times. And like, so I learned this from my dad a long time ago. He'd always have a topo map sitting in the basement on a table. When he'd leave, he'd have a spot where he was marked at, where he'd park his truck at, so that we knew where he was at if he didn't come home. And now with technology, we just send a waypoint. Even if I'm halfway across the country somewhere else, he'll send me GPS coordinates where he's going to be, or where he's going in to scout or do whatever, because if he doesn't have phone service or anything else, so that and just like there's these things can be applied to to deer hunting and turkey hunting and whatever else it might be in other aspects, versus just looking at it at these once in a lifetime or once a year type trips. These types of planning can be really built into anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up, because anybody who's heard me talk with you on your podcast before, I'm from Ohio, right? So You're from Pennsylvania. And mind you, when I grew up, like I said, I was kind of self-taught. I don't know if I was self-taught or self-destructive, but anyways, a lot of the stereotypical whitetail hunting is, a couple 100 yards from the road or the truck, or, whatever the case may be. And there's nothing against it. I'm not saying that in any kind of demeaning way. But when I look at some of the stuff you guys are doing in Pennsylvania, and your mountain hunts, right? Your big buck mountain hunts, and you're going in and you're setting up saddles and things like that. And I don't know if you guys ever, spend the night away and then climb back in a tree. But my point is, it's like a mile or 3 miles doesn't seem that terribly far until you're hypothermic, until you've got a sprained ankle, until you fell out of the tree because the limb broke and you hit your head and you're dizzy. Like, you absolutely need to apply the same level of planning and discipline and preparation for that kind of hunt as you do for any hunt out west. So I by no means do I want to make it sound like it's only a Western thing? Because it's not. There are plenty of places back east where you guys are even half a mile. Like it doesn't have to be that far where you need to make sure you're prepared. Somebody knows where you are. There's bears there. There's lightning. There's snakes. Like there's all those things, right? There's in your case, falling out of trees potentially. And people need to be prepared because if they don't, then they are setting themselves up to potentially be a victim, and they don't need to be, right? Like I just keep saying they're unforced errors. And, I always have this mantra that kind of runs through my head when I'm maybe not doing something dumb, definitely when I'm doing something dumb, but maybe when I'm doing something that's like, I know I need to do it, but it's a little sketch like, hey, I need to cross a log that's 10 feet above a river. And, I got to get across this. And I'm like, don't die dumb, don't die dumb, don't die dumb, don't fall off and drown, all those things. And so that could happen anywhere, man.
Yeah.
It doesn't just have to be out west by any means.
And it's I'm glad you said that about like the falling from trees too, because that was something that as there's more people getting into the quote unquote mobile hunting aspect of whitetails and basically going in, setting up, tearing down and moving on public ground or on private. But there's been, hunting out of a saddle that I do a lot of is I think one of the safest methods that you can do for climbing up and down the tree, because you're constantly connected and you have that, but you can still fall and have problems with basically hanging there and having I'm trying to think of the right term for it, but basically where you have tension underneath your legs,
Yep.
that sort of trauma there. But anyways, like I was talking to Jason, he's the owner of this company, Timber Ninja, I work with, and he just came out with a product called the Extract that you clip onto your saddle when you're in the tree. And if you were to fall, say your platform happened to break, things can happen, or you slipped or something happened, that you can deploy this, and it has like a ring, like a step ladder that basically comes down that you can put your feet in, take the trauma off, and you're able to self-extract. And like I was like, man, like that type of stuff, I need to do a better job at myself of showing safe ways of doing these types of things as someone who has a voice in this community. So like to help with planning on the whitetail side, even me, when I bring people like you on and others that help with this, I focus a lot on the Western hunting front, but I need to, really put that information out, because it's the same thing for the whitetail side of things, just different hazards that can come up with it.
Yeah. If you were to go a mile off the road or the trail out west, you can get in it just as much trouble as you can going a mile off the road in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You absolutely can. There is zero difference. But to your point, yeah, and I guess I'm somewhat guilty of this. Like I tend to focus on the western side. I mean, that's where I live.
Yeah.
But when you're whitetail hunting, it's not like you're seeking people. So you're trying to go to isolated places. You're trying to go kind of as far off the beaten path as you can. And so you can absolutely still get into trouble. And I love that. Timber Ninja, is that what you said?
Yeah.
That's a badass name. But yeah, that's super cool. It's like this self-rescue mindset. It really comes down to a mindset of this. There's a difference. I was telling somebody the other day, there's a big difference between being prepared and paranoid, right? And I like to say what if weighs a lot. And so you can kind of what if a scenario to death and either choose to never go do it because you've what ifed it to death, or you carry so much gear that you're not super effective. And I think that just some of that comes and goes with experience, either what you're doing or the environment you're doing it in. But that planning and preparation, like that is, again, that's the foundation of everything you build on. And either for that trip or, year after year, as you just get better as an outdoorsman, you're just building on that. And I would tell you that, 20 years ago, I used to do stuff, and my poor wife, I put her through hell over the years, never telling her where I'm going. We didn't have inReaches and stuff at the time, but, never telling her where I'm going and this and that. And now, even though I'm 20 years more experienced, I would never consider going anywhere and not telling somebody where I am and dropping them a pin and, telling them where my truck's parked and all those kinds of things. So, it's kind of like play smarter, not harder deal.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. And there's just, it also, I wanted to just, one other quick thing was like back on the whitetail side, there was a time when it was 2019, I did a backpack hunt and rifle season in Pennsylvania, and actually went back in. It was about 4.5 miles, set up camp, and it was a very desolate location. And I had probably one of the worst nights of weather, and I terrible tent planning. I set up in the bottom of a creek bottom where it thawed once I had my hot stove going, and then it turned to a muddy mess, and I'm in a floorless shelter, and it was just like I was wet, and it was, freezing rain. I couldn't get a fire started, like everything that you could think of. And I was like, I had a worse night and next day of experience than I did any time out west, and I was in my own home state, and it was just something that I laughed about. But yeah. So, anyways,
like I said, some lessons we have to relearn.
Yeah, it 100%. And I learned how much, I feel like it's one of those pride things. Like as a guy, you want to be able to oh, I can start a fire anywhere, and that's why I love like watching your videos of all the different ways of like practically starting a fire. Cause I was like, I thought, I'm like, oh, I've, lived in the woods my whole life. I can do this. Well, I struggled, and me and my buddy were like, man, we're a terrible example of outdoorsmen right now.
Yeah, but you know what I love, Beau, and like a platform like this is that you talk about that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, especially, the hunters and outdoorsmen and backcountry travelers and all that, like, you got to have you have to be pretty confident and have a little bit of an ego, and we all have egos, but we also make mistakes. I don't care who you are. I don't care how experienced you are. We all make mistakes and remake mistakes. And the more we can talk about that, the more it makes people realize that not only can it happen to anybody, but like you're not some failure if you go out there and you can't start a fire, right?
Yeah.
Or you're not some failure if you didn't find the best campsite. I think those errors become less and less as you gain experience, but you still, at least for me, like no matter what, my first trip out in the winter, last couple of years I've been doing it by myself. And I'll just go on a ski tour and spend the night. And inevitably I will, forget something or, forgot, oh, I'm supposed to do this or not that, or I should have brought, this and whatever, or my water freezes or whatever the case may be. And I've been doing this for a long, long time. And it's just, I don't beat myself up about it. I'm like, nope, I'm just working the kinks out, getting my rhythm, and now like next week, I think, I'm going to go basically spend a week out ski touring. We were just doing some filming this last weekend. It was like a low of 3 or 4 degrees. And like my system's dialed now, like back to being dialed. But like, I still got to like get in that groove and figure it out. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I need to remember to, bring my puffy socks or whatever it is,
Yeah.
But I think the more we talk about that, the more attainable all this stuff is. It's not like anybody can do it. I think people just need to, this is easier said than done, but I think we just have to have a little patience with ourselves. And like some of these trips that I'll just speak for you, like that you've done, like the Colorado stuff at altitude, or, now going to Alaska, you're going back to Alaska. You've been there before.
Yeah.
But like those trips, okay, now you're starting to get a little farther out there, and you have to have the basics pretty well wired, because now you're going to start to interject a lot more things, more isolation, where maybe you can't get out because you flew in and, somebody can't come get you, or there's grizzly bears, or there's big rivers you got to cross. Like there's so many more skill sets you have to start kind of combining. But again, if you don't understand just how to become a good woodsman or outdoorsman and build some of these skills over time, which to me is the fun part, because hunting season's so short, it's like, well, what else are you going to do the other 9 months out of the year? But until you kind of do that and start figuring those things out, like some of those bigger trips are maybe a little bit not as attainable, but But if you're patient with yourself and you're like, oh, but in 3 years, 5 years, wherever you are in your kind of progression, then it's like, I can go to Alaska in 5 years and pull that remote trip off, on Kodiak Island as an example, or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, that's totally attainable. But you can't come off the couch having never done this and expect to go do that and then think everything's going to go right and you're going to be completely safe and find all this success. Like, the odds are just a lot lower that that's going to happen for you until you build these foundational skills.
Well, heck, I mean, my first trip to Colorado in 2016, the first time I ever went out there, 3 days of backpack hunting, I felt like I was, I don't know, I felt like I was gonna die. Like I was like, I need to get, I just completely was not in a good headspace. Where, last year I spent 21 days in Montana, and 18 of those days I spent in the backcountry, and it was like you build upon those things. Like, I could never have done that, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it's just like,
Right.
as you start
Yeah.
doing it, you start building that stuff. And I think that's, for me, it's been awesome to learn and just like see skills build over time. And then now getting, dropped off at a lake in Alaska for 12 days, like that'll be another new challenge of, putting my, one more step forward of building skills and getting better. And, learning from someone like you that's had, 30 years experience doing this type of stuff. It's like, it's fun. And like you said, the hunting season is short. So like, I
Yeah.
love the other times of the year, like figuring this stuff out and taking gear out in the field and playing with it and seeing where my gaps are, or trying to learn new skills, whether it's, through an online course or in person or spending time around somebody. It's just like that part is what's fun. And I think that's where you can grow so much and make your opportunities that you have as a hunter. The hunting skills will come, but you have these other foundational things built. It really helps those opportunities happen.
Yeah. That's why I like to say, like, there's no off season, because even though there's hunting seasons, like, there's always something you could be doing, working on, training, learning, tweaking. Everybody loves gear, buying gear, testing gear, and just, outside of the e-scouting and the shooting the bow or whatever the case may be, like, there's all these other things that you got to get really good at. I mean, people used to backpack, more than probably they do now, at least in our world. A lot of people that used to backpack used to come into hunting, right? And so now, but that doesn't happen. But if you think about it, like, all those skills to just be a rock solid backpacker, right? Put your camp on your back, put everything you need, and go out for multiple days and live and just hang out and have a good time, feed yourself, care for yourself, take care of blisters or whatever the case may be. Like, those are so important if you ever want to go be a backcountry hunter, right? And so it's like, if you don't have those skills, at the same time you're building all the hunting skills, man, go backpack. Go backpack up to a high lake and fish for 3 days, or go backpack and go shed hunting, or go backpack and practice your land navigation and some things like that, or test out your new boots or clothing or rain gear, whatever the case may be. If you're going into an area to hunt, maybe in the summertime or late spring is a good time to go and backpack into that area, right? Depending on what you're doing, maybe you take your family, or maybe that's the time you go fishing, and then you just kind of learn that area, and then you can go back and maybe exploit that terrain a little bit more to your advantage when you're trying to hunt and have to maneuver around it and can't, just walk the trails, because that's not going to be, conducive to getting the wind in your face or whatever it is.
Yeah. So what, we're talking about like lessons learned. Or like even advancing as a hunter, for yourself, that you've had all this experience through the years. Has there been any hunts in the last couple of years that have really like kind of had you step out of your comfort zone a little bit and learn some new things when it comes to that?
Uh, I would tell you that, so just having lived in Alaska for so long and just been focused more on the higher mountains, some of the hot weather stuff I've had to kind of relearn.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my experiences from the desert, not hunting, that I've had to like rethink, and hydration's been one of them, right? And I can't eat a lot when it's hot, but I have to hydrate. Like, what does that look like? And, bringing tarps like this last elk season, the first where we were hunting anyways, the first like 10 or 12 days was like oppressively hot. Like I ended up killing a mule deer, while we were on the elk hunt. I ended up killing a mule deer and it was 103 degrees out that afternoon. Like it was not as hot when I was hunting antelope in August as it was when I was hunting elk in September. And so, brought a tarp to pitch just to get out of the sun, and I talk a lot about clothing systems and managing moisture and staying dry and staying warm. But all that applies to not just staying warm, but on the converse side, dumping heat to cool off. And so that's been a little bit of an adjustment for me because I never experienced a lot of that, like up in Alaska in September. I mean, hell, it could be, and oftentimes was snowing on you, right?
Yeah.
And cold. And so just trying to figure that back out. Like, man, I don't necessarily need the same amount of gear, but like I said, I always bring a puffy, I always bring rain gear because I know that it could just as easily, and this is maybe a little different, the east-west thing, like it can and will snow any month of the year in the mountains out west, guaranteed. And if you're not prepared for that, and I just, maybe that's where some experience comes in. I know enough to know, don't get lulled into this false sense of security because it could happen. But yeah, that hot weather stuff is a little bit foreign to me, or it was. I'm kind of coming around to it now, and
Yeah.
and kind of dialing in my system. I probably need to talk about that a little bit more, but yeah, that's been something a little new for me.
That first week in Montana, so I was there at the same time last year, was terrible. I mean, I remember seeing that 100 and, above 100-degree weather that first week we were there. And I remember in the middle of the day just trying to find shade. I was just like laying down, just like I couldn't find shade anywhere. I didn't have a tarp that I brought with me, which would have been a good thing to be able to have. And it's just like, and then water, there was no water anywhere other than some cattle troughs that we'd found. So basically I had to stock up. I was carrying 5 liters of water with me at any time and I was drinking all of that. And then on the way back to camp, I would go to that cattle trough and fill back up. And then in the morning, even top everything off before I would go into the places that I was hunting. So it was really important. And luckily I knew ahead of time to look for those types of things because I knew how dry it had been. And I was able to see it on the map where those tanks were and be able to find it, which was super helpful because otherwise that would have been a very miserable experience, being able to do that. But I'll tell you what, It was kind of nice. It kept a lot of people out of the mountains at that time.
Yeah, I'll bet it. Yeah. Well, it did. And honestly, having lived in Montana and I was hunting in Montana, if I was smarter, I probably wouldn't have hunted that first week, but but I just can't not do it, right?
Yeah.
But, water oftentimes is the thing that holds us back, right? Or doesn't allow us to go and stay as long as we want in an area. And we'll find our campsites and we'll find our glassy knobs and we'll find the north faces and the open parks on the south faces or whatever it is, or the benches halfway up and all this terrain for animals, habitat. But if we don't figure out like where we think the water sources are or where we know the water sources are, and then think through how we're going to purify that water and like what we're going to put it in, like you said, 5 liters. I know people, they don't carry that much containment to hold 5 liters, right? So you have to figure all those things out, or man, you could have the best area in the world, but you're not going to be able to spend enough time in there to really, exploit it. And so, yeah, water's a huge one. Whereas, living in Alaska, there was too much water, right? It was an abundance of water. Like you literally just didn't even think twice about water. It's like, oh, there's water. And if I'm up high, I probably don't even need to filter it if I don't want to. And here you're like, man, water's almost the number one thing you have to find once you get it you think you're in a good area. It's like, is there water here? And if not, how do I, how much can I bring in? How long can I stay? And if I can't find it, how am I gonna collect it? How am I gonna filter it? How am I gonna purify it? People are like, oh, I just always use a SteriPen, or I always use this, and it's like there's no like one perfect tool depending on that water source, but without that, like, and we always concentrate on food because we all like to eat, but it's like water is a great equalizer. Again, especially when you're at altitude and you need even more water, or when it's 100 degrees in September and you didn't plan on that, and you literally almost can't drink enough water. It's just, it really becomes the deciding factor in where you can go and how long you could stay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. I feel like I still haven't figured out like the perfect water filtration system. Like, I right now I think the one system I've been using is like a Sawyer. I have a Sawyer mini gravity fed system that I'll bring, especially when I'm doing like a base camp type thing. And then I always carry the little Aquamira tabs too as backup, because I've had those filters plugged before. I had a platypus one before that plugged up, and it was just a mess to be able to have. But it's just like, it feels like none of those systems like work really great in any sort of all around environment. So I have a whole bunch of them that I use depending on the situation.
Yeah, I think you have to have like a toolbox full of those kinds of things, and not any one is going to work the best all the time. Like, to you, same as you, like I always bring Aquamira tabs or something like that as backups. People say, well, I always use a SteriPen, and I'm like, well, depending on where you're hunting, like if you're hunting elk and it's kind of timbered and lowlands, and every reasonable water source has already been occupied by elk, or you go into an area and it's like, oh, well, guides and outfitters are in here with their horses straying, or like in Montana, you run into areas that are full of domestic sheep. You're like, man, I don't know if I want to pull my water out of there if I don't have to, but if I have to, I better make sure I can fully purify it. But, a SteriPen doesn't take any of the debris out. So it's like, is that okay with you? Or do you want to filter the debris out before you like, there's so many things to consider. And again, there's no like perfect answer. I can't say, oh, you're going to Colorado, use this. Oh, you're going to Montana, use that. You just have to know in that pre-trip planning, you're like, I have a pretty good idea where the water sources will be, or what the water source will be. If it's coming off a big snow field in Colorado at 12,000 feet, a lot of times they don't make big enough pools to like collect the water from, right? So maybe the filtration filter can't get under the water, or can't get in the water. But it's like, but if you have a gravity fed, I did this a couple years ago, like I could take a seep and I could funnel the seep into the dirty bag and then hang it and then let gravity do it in 3 liters of water at a time. I was like, man, that works. And honestly, I didn't know that the first time we were in there. I learned that because I'm like, well, there's no water unless I do this.
Yeah.
Like the pump I had wasn't going to work. Like there was nothing to pump from, unless I somehow, it really had to engineer something. So you kind of have to have those tools and then just know how to use them, and then just pick the right one for the job.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you. I don't like a ton of debris in my water if I can, if I can avoid it. And that's why I've like really went to those gravity fed ones a lot of times. They're a little bit more weight to carry and stuff.
They are.
But I find peace in having clean water when I'm drinking it, at least like even visibly not seeing things floating around all the time and bugs. And, like we had those cattle tanks, and if you were to fill right out the tank, there's just bugs and all this crap that's in there. Luckily, there was a pipe that was coming out of it, but it was such a slow drip. Unless you had 45 minutes to sit there and wait, sometimes you just had to scoop it up and kind of deal with it. And I would not have been okay if I was just dumping my Nalgene bottle in there, and then that would have been kind of disgusting.
I don't have you had Giardia before?
No.
Man, I tell you, so I got it I think in 2018, So, years and years, I never had it. I'm not, don't do what I do, but, even when I was running around California in the Sierras and stuff, if we were up high, I'd always just dip the Nalgene right in the creek or whatever, small water sources. But man, I got Giardia in 2018 in British Columbia, and I got to tell you, like me and two other guys, um, it's the worst, most humiliating thing you've ever wanted to have. And, luckily, if there's any good thing about Giardia, a lot of times the the time from infection to time of onset of symptoms is like, I don't know, 7 to 10 days. So oftentimes you're out of the field, unless you happen to get it like day 1 or 2. But I'll tell you what, if you get it in the field, luckily I didn't, but if you were to get it in the field, depending on where you were and what you were doing, you would be in a really, really bad way. Because not only is it just, like I said, kind of humiliating to have it, but I don't think there would be any way to not become dehydrated. And that would set you up for some really, really bad things, right? Like if you had it, you'd be like, you'd have to leave like immediate and just hope that you could get yourself out of the field before you completely dehydrated yourself. Because whatever goes in comes right out.
Yeah.
And so your body just doesn't have enough time. And so, if you had to hike out or whatever the case may be, it'd be really tough. And I don't think I'd wish that on my worst enemy, and I damn sure don't want it again. So now I'm almost like I'm more, again, talking about experience and doing things, like I'm more cautious now than ever with my water, because it's like I need it. I understand that, but I don't want to. That gamble to me isn't worth it anymore, because I've felt the sting of Giardia, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that again.
No, I know, and like you were saying, like in Alaska, there's some places that, when I was up at caribou hunting, the transporter was saying, no, you don't need to filter your water. I was like, I'm still going to do it. It doesn't take that much longer. Just,
Yeah.
I feel better about doing it. And I've never even had any sort of sickness from it. It's just, I've heard these horror stories, and if I can avoid that, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. And there's so much water up there. It's not like it takes that much longer for you to, filter it or, get rid of it. But man, down here in the lower 48, like there's no way. Like I'm probably going to go to Alaska, probably go back to Kodiak Island in probably early November is my guess. My buddy drew a brown bear tag, so
Oh, nice.
I'm going to go back there, help him hunt that bear, and hopefully do some deer hunting. But see, I already know it's like, oh, well, I mean, I know that environment real well, but I'm like, oh, probably we're going to camp, probably we're going to get dropped off, probably where we're going to hunt, be hunting bears. Like we're going to be in the lowlands. And I'm like, there's no way I'm pulling water right out of the stream. Like, even though I did in the past, I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that anymore. Like, no way. Good chance that guy's putting us in where other people have been. It's in the lowlands. There's lots of animals around. I just can't take that chance anymore. And it's just not worth it to me, for the extra effort it takes, every time to fill bladders or whatever. It's just like, yeah. But it's just part of that planning process that sometimes you can overlook if you haven't like experienced some of the issues, you and I have had. It's just easy to overlook or go, oh, well, I live in Vermont as an example, and there's water everywhere, and you don't think about it, and you just assume that there's going to be water in Idaho, and then the reality is there's none, and 24 hours later you're pushed out, and you're like, damn, I can't go back in there for any longer than 24 hours because there's no water. And now what do you do? And I just think you have to, when you're e-scouting, which I'm not the best e-scouter, like you've had Mark on, right? Yeah, like that, Livesey's like, he's insane, like in a good way.
Yeah, he is.
With his e-scouting, and he and I have talked a bunch, and I just like, hey man, like have you ever talked about this with, in your course and stuff like this? Because I think people sometimes get in there and they just sometimes think things that we just take for granted we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Or we shouldn't when we're communicating it, because those are the things that'll push out. You'll never get a chance to shoot your rifle or bow at an animal if you can't camping there for more than a couple days because you have no water. Like it's just the odds of you succeeding are just infinitely smaller, you know?
Well, I mean, even looking at the different times a year with water, like when I bear hunted the same place that I hunted elk later, you know, when I was bear hunting, there was so much water everywhere from runoff and everything. I mean, you tripped over it everywhere you went. And then you go out there in September and I couldn't find any. And it was like, it was just a totally different, you know, from the time of year perspective.
Yeah.
And again, luckily, I had a buddy that lived out there and kind of, you know, gave me a heads up on the conditions, which helped out a lot. But it's just another thing to think about, because it might even look like on a map that there's a stream coming through there, but depending on the conditions, that stream might not even be flowing at that point.
Yeah, it could either be based on time of year, or, you know, 1 year's a drought year and 1 year's not. Like we've got so much snow out here out west right now that, you know, we'll see what spring brings, but, you know, if it doesn't warm up and melt off all at once, and if it does, it's going to flood everything. So if you're coming out to spring bear hunt or fish, you should understand that. But if it doesn't, you know, it's like animals are going to be in different areas, you know, the animal concentration can be moved around. Like last year, there was so much water throughout the spring that there was so much green grass that areas that traditionally, you know, you'd find elk or deer in, they weren't there in concentrations because they could kind of be anywhere. And so, you know, just understanding those kind of conditions is good to know. But yeah, I'm hoping we've had the last of our big snow, because it's been rough.
Yeah, that's
since early November. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had the complete opposite out here in Pennsylvania. It's been literally the mildest winter that I've seen in a long time. And then seeing what you guys have had is just like, I feel bad for the deer and elk at that point.
Yeah, we've had 6 yearling mule deer die within my property and the 2 others around me just in the last 3 weeks that we know of. Yeah, it's just, they just, at a certain point, they just wear out. And we've had so much freeze thaw that it's created ice layers. So, you know, oftentimes they'll dig down to get to the veg, and it's just getting to the point where they're not even able to do that.
Yeah.
So luckily we had a warm up last couple of days. So like I said, I think spring's coming. I'm hoping, knock on wood, but they need to break for sure. They need to break.
Yeah. Well, John, I had a whole bunch of other things that I wanted to talk to you about here, but to be respectful of your time, I think we'll cut this one short here. But I really appreciate you coming on again and talking with me. And for anybody that's listening, you can follow along. I'll do a little bit of marketing for you here, John. I'd recommend going knowledgefromstorms.com, signing up for his email newsletter, and a lot of different stuff that you have coming out, from articles and videos and everything there. And I believe it's J Barklow on Instagram.
Yes.
And then outdoor class, sign up for that and check out your new course, Backcountry Mission Planning. Is there anything else I can think of there?
No, I think that's it. Isn't that enough? It sounds like a lot. Like a lot. But no, I'm excited, man. I'm excited to finally get the information out there. Hopefully people will find value in it. It's, like I said, it's been a goal of mine for a decade to kind of do something like this. So I'm just honored that Randy and those guys would ask me to be a part of it. So, and you too. It's super cool.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. Oh, cool. Well, with that being said, John, again, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be together in May in Utah,
beginning of
May, some shed hunting. So I'm sure we'll do some more podcasting and some other stuff there. So
awesome.
I'm excited.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Beau.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.